Start sharing the presentation. All right, can everyone see that okay?
I think we are live.
We are live, and I can see your screen, Lillian.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you everyone for joining us on this webinar. We're really excited to be launching this new series called Empower Up, and this is actually going to be the first iteration of what is hopefully a long list of civic engagement trainings that you can access at any time on our website in order to talk more deeply, to further discuss these topics and to get to know a little bit more. So this is called Go Green, How to Be a Better Steward to the Environment. Oops. My name is Lillian Trin. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm an alumna of the University of Oklahoma. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Letters Constitutional Studies, and I'm a Civic Engagement Corps member. And joining me on this webinar today is April. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit, April?
Yeah, thanks Lillian and the Civic Engagement team for inviting me to this webinar. My name is April Wing and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. I graduated with a doctorate of pharmacy from California and also work with nonprofit organizations through my work as the CVP Engagement Director. So my background in public health makes sustainability a priority in my personal and professional life. So I'm really excited to be here today.
All right, so first and foremost, let's talk a little bit about what this Empower Up series is going to be. So we definitely understand that civic engagement can be really hard and daunting for a lot of people to become involved with. So what we want to do is we want to hit three main goals. The first is that we want to give context to civic issues. So we know that there are a lot of barriers to being more civically engaged, such as jargon, lack of information, or too much information, and that can make people feel really overwhelmed. So the second point that we want to hit is to make civic engagement easier. So civic participation can just be day-to-day actions, and they're a lot easier than you might think. And our third point is to motivate people to take action. And this is by ending all of our Empower Up trainings with a call to action, different ways that you are able to engage with these topics. So jumping right into the actual webinar, the first question that I have is, what images come to mind when you think of climate change? So April, what kind of images do you think of when you think of climate change?
I think for me, the biggest one is probably going to be the turtles.
Yeah, so something that I've commonly heard a lot, and I know April has as well, is save the turtles, right? They're like, oh, don't use that straw because we want to save the turtles. Or, you know, you think of plastic waste that is floating in the ocean, or you think about animals or the way that our actions impact animals and the environment. But overall, the biggest issue that these images have is that we are distancing ourselves from the problem. We're distancing ourselves from the issue of sustainability and everything that it impacts. So when we fail to account for how that impacts us, it makes us feel less responsible for the things that we do or the things we're putting out there in the world. And how exactly does climate change impact us as people? Well, there has been an increase in natural disasters. So this chart measures the increase in natural disasters over the last 3 decades, and it's increased dramatically from about 200 natural disasters in 1980 to over 600 natural disasters currently, with the biggest changes in floods, landslides, and avalanches rising by almost 5 times.
Just want to make a quick pause here and let everyone know in case you aren't able to access the Zoom webinar chat, but you're able to post questions into the chat or message us. We'll be keeping track of the questions and then answering them at the end. We'll also let folks unmute themselves at the end to ask questions as well. And these slides will be publicly available, so you don't have to worry about taking notes. But on this slide is a very personal example to me. So the Mekong River in Vietnam is actually a really personal example of the way that climate change affects us. This river runs through several Southeast Asian countries and as a result collects all of the trash from these countries into Vietnam, which is the last country that this river flows through. In addition to that, the community has faced the worst drought recorded in over 100 years, affecting an estimated 2.5 million people in the community and decreasing the amount of fish in the river. And the pollution in this river is truly crippling communities that depend on it to exist, and has even turned the river black in some areas. It's a key source of water for a lot of towns, as well as a key source of income for the seafood farms in the area, and the health of the Mekong Delta is severely endangered overall. So environmental protection is a core issue, and at the heart of it, we have to acknowledge that this pollution is a direct result of people's actions. And this is especially important because we as individuals contribute to climate change, which I'll turn over to Lillian to introduce.
So what exactly is climate change, right? You hear that term being thrown out a lot, and it is sort of a general term that we use to describe the changes in the climate that we're experiencing today. And many of these changes that we are experiencing are a result of greenhouse gases and the greenhouse gas effect. So what is the greenhouse gas effect? The greenhouse gas effect is the result of heat from the sun and the earth being trapped in our atmosphere by greenhouse gases. So greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide are emitted through almost every single action we do here on Earth. The more we consume energy and the more that we manufacture products, we are producing more greenhouse gases that are released into the environment, which traps heat and warms the Earth's climate little by little every single day. And as you can see from this graphic, according to the EPA, in 2016, 6,511 million metric tons of greenhouse gases were emitted. And you can see here that 25% of those emissions came from electricity and heat, whereas 20.4% came from agriculture and land. So hopefully this gives you kind of a sense of urgency about why environmentalism encourages energy conservation, limiting the use of fossil fuels, and cutting back on meat consumption. So what does trash have to do with it? Did you actually know that 91% of recycling is sent to landfill? Landfills not only produce natural resources that we have here on Earth, such as water and ground soil, but actually landfills produce a really potent gas called methane gas, which is 21 times more potent at trapping heat than carbon dioxide. So when you send things like food, produce, or other organic materials to landfill, it actually decomposes in something called an anaerobic environment, which means deprived of oxygen. And when things decompose in an anaerobic environment, they produce methane gas. So landfills overall produce 21% of methane emissions and 5% of total greenhouse gases.
So just putting that into perspective, in the US alone, 4.4 pounds of solid waste is produced per person per day. That's the equivalent of 1,600 pounds a year. So visualize 200 feet of trash from just one person. And if you multiply that by 4, then the average family generates the equivalent amount of trash of the weight of an elephant. And then when you put that into perspective of the entire country and the states, the US generates almost 700,000 tons of trash each year. And that's enough trash to reach the moon and back 25 times. And this is just 1 year, and it keeps accumulating because it can take hundreds of years for plastic to decompose. And in the meantime, it continues to contaminate the soil and the water. So this all sounds very intimidating, but we want you to keep in mind that the majority of climate change effects are caused by major corporations, inadequate government oversight, and a lot of factors outside of our individual control. But with that being said, I believe that we still have an individual responsibility to leave the world a better place. And y'all recognize that because you're watching this webinar right now. So this training is really here to take a practical stance on how to help you go green and make a difference. So we'll break it down into 3 areas. First, how can we make a difference as individuals? I think most people here are familiar with the concept of reduce, reuse, and recycle. And it's in that particular order because you can actually make a bigger impact when you reduce and avoid single-use items such as plastic. In general, single-use items are those that are intended to be used only once before they're thrown away or recycled. And you've probably seen these in the form of takeout containers or straws. Just switching to a reusable water bottle will save an average of 156 plastic bottles annually. So this week, we challenge you to try ditching plastic during one of your meals. And instead of using something like a plastic cup, you can bring a mug into work. Or if you're big on puns, on Thoughtful Thursday, you can try to avoid plastic water bottles and invest in a reusable water bottle that's healthier for not only you, but also the environment. So if everyone at a VSA conference did this, even just 150 attendees would save 23,000 plastic bottles annually. And if you're looking for innovative technology, there are plenty of apps that are environmentally friendly. I use Food for All, which is an app that connects users in Boston and New York with restaurants that have a surplus of food that you can buy for half off, which not only helps reduce food waste, which is one of the main causes of climate change, but there are plenty of other innovative food waste apps in each city. So feel free to recommend us some in your local area. Ecosia is another free search engine that uses their proceeds to plant trees, and it doesn't cost anything to install. And if you're looking for an app that increases your productivity but also helps the environment, I recommend the Forest app, which grows a virtual tree on your screen as you work, and then also helps plant trees in real life as well. So far they've planted over 670,000 trees with Trees for the Future, which is pretty exciting. And then on the next slide, there's also a lot of company-wide programs that offer simple solutions to reusing common materials that we see a lot. So Crayola offers a program called Color Cycle that can convert old markers into energy and repurpose the entire marker. So if you're a student or teacher, you can ask your administration to participate in this program. But one thing I really do want to focus on is buying things pre-loved from thrift stores or setting a goal to minimize the amount of new items you can buy. So pre-loved shopping is really about focusing on buying things that someone else has owned and maybe loved before. So not only does this save money, but you can shop consciously and avoid contributing to fast fashion. So I'm not sure if a lot of people are aware of this, but textile production has doubled over the last 30 years and contributes to the landfill waste produced each year because one pair of jeans requires over 10,000 liters of water to produce. So if people thrift shopped instead of buying new clothes for 1 year, we'd save 13 tons of gallons of water, which is enough water for all of California for 1 year, and also remove 165 billion pounds of carbon dioxide, which is the equivalent of taking cars in LA off the road for 4 years. So if you don't know where to start, I'd recommend ThredUp, which is in this slide, and it's one of the world's largest online thrift stores that serves as a platform to buy, sell, and even swap pre-loved clothes. They've developed this fashion footprint calculator so you can actually see how your fashion habits are impacting the environment. So you can take the quiz and then even get discounts with companies like Rent the Runway. So not only do you save money, but you also see ways to reduce your impact. And like we said before, we'll offer more suggestions later on in the presentation and share these slides so you can feel free to revisit any of these ideas later.
The next way that you can make a difference as an individual is to vote with your money. And this means using your money to send a message and create market trends that say that we as consumers want to support companies that have better environmentalism practices. So the kind of things you want to look for is you want to invest in quality, right? You don't want to buy something that's cheap or support fast fashion because ultimately you're making more detriment to the environment than you would be if you invested in one quality piece. Another way of thinking about it is when you invest in quality, you're investing in one item instead of several different versions of that item. So if I use the example of a sponge, you can buy a really cheap sponge, you can use it for maybe a month and then end up throwing it in the trash. Or you can invest in a really quality dish scrubber or a better material, right? And then you are able to use that for a much longer time than when you bought the cheaper, less quality item. So also you want to look for things that are made out of natural materials. For example, you want to purchase clothing that maybe is made with all cotton or bamboo thread because cotton and bamboo thread is more quality, and then also you're able to compost that once you're done with it. Shop for cruelty-free cosmetics and skincare. So cosmetic and skincare companies that don't support animal testing, maybe vegan and cruelty-free cosmetics as well. There's actually a really big market for those. And also do your research and be a responsible consumer. So just looking at websites and seeing if they have pages about their company's sustainability practices, if they have made a commitment to use their profits to make the world a better place, etc. Those are all things that you want to support with your money. And then before you purchase something, consider what you're going to do with it when you're done with it, also known as end-of-life care. So for example, the clothing example that I gave, when you are done with a particular piece of clothing, if it's made from all natural materials, you can compost it. You don't just have to throw it away. You can also give things that you have no use for anymore to friends and family. You can organize clothing swaps among your friends and bring clothes that you're no longer interested in, and then pick out clothes from their closet that they're no longer interested in. And overall, just keeping textiles and keeping waste out of the out of landfills. Consider alternative uses for something that is broken. There's actually a Japanese, April, correct me on, or what is the name of it again?
I think it's Kitsugi, where you mend things and you kind of highlight their imperfections, right?
Yeah, that. But reusing things and considering alternative uses for things around your house that might just be a little broken is a really great way to flex that creative muscle. And also it's a really great way to save money and to keep things out of landfill. So you never want to throw something away. Always be thinking about how to reuse something, how to upcycle something, or how to give something away to people who will appreciate it more. And then also in terms of supporting really great companies that have really great sustainability initiatives, there is something called a B Corporation. So you can actually go and look on their website. A B Corporation are companies that have essentially certified that they will put people over profit. So actually, according to the website, I have this pulled up on my computer and now I'm on my laptop. So give me a second. So B corporations are companies that have been certified to put people over profit, and they balance their goals as a company with ethical good. So they're legally required to consider the impact of their decisions on workers, customers, suppliers, and the community. And all B corporations have committed to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by the year 2030, which is 20 years ahead of the targets that were set forth in the Paris Agreement. So another way that you can make a difference as an individual is recycling. I'm sure a lot of us are pretty familiar with the concept of recycling, but actually a lot of things that we consider recyclable aren't actually recyclable. So if you didn't know this, glass and metal are something called infinitely recyclable, which means that they can be melted down over and over again and remade into new products, and the quality of the material won't degrade over time. But plastic can only be recycled once. And also, if you send something to recycling that isn't clean, it actually gets thrown into landfill. So they actually don't have the machines in the recycling plants to clean out recycling in order to make it worth repurposing. So you want to make sure that you're cleaning things out before you recycle them. And you also want to do research on what your local municipalities accept or will take curbside. So for instance, in those bins that are your apartment complexes, or if you live in a home, the bins that you take out to the street every single week, there are varying degrees of what different municipalities will and won't take. So for example, what is accepted in New Orleans can be a lot different than what's accepted in other places. I think glass actually isn't recyclable curbside in New Orleans, but plastic bags are recyclable in Bloomington, Indiana, which is actually really rare and uncommon. So some common things that can be recycled, paper, of course, aluminum cans for the most part, glass for the most part, paper and hardback books, aluminum foil trays that are clean. So you want to make sure that any aluminum that you recycle is clean and it doesn't have food particles in it because they will throw that away. Rigid plastics are almost always curbside recyclable. Clean cardboard boxes and pizza boxes, wide mouth plastic containers, and plastic bottles and jugs. Every single piece of hard plastic has a recycling triangle on it with a number in the middle. And those numbers directly correlate to what kind of plastic it is. So you'll need to check with your local municipality to see what numbers they accept. Some may only accept 1 or 2, 1 through 6, etc., or 1 through 7. So you'll want to see what is accepted in your city.
And composting is great because it's the natural process of breaking down organic materials to reduce the amount of waste, which in turn reduces the amount of methane gas produced. So you can compost in your backyard or take your compost to a facility where they'll do it for you. And a lot of cities have also started rolling out food and yard scrap bins where you can leave your compost in there and they'll take it away from for you. So even if you live in an apartment complex, for example, you could compost in a bin on your balcony. You just have to do a little bit of research and it'll go a long way. And you might not realize it, but there's a lot of foods that can be composted, which is great because it basically takes no energy or resources to happen. You just put it in the dirt. But we've shared a list of what you can compost on this list here, and you can find more graphics like this one online. But some of the things that we want to highlight that can be composted include fruit and vegetable peels, coffee grounds, and even the greasy cardboard from pizza boxes can be composted. Napkins that have food scraps on them can also be composted instead of just being thrown away. But we also want to highlight that there's a lot of items that can't be recycled or composted and would need to be trashed.
So what exactly has to be trashed, right? A lot of these I know are staples in our lives, and there are things that a lot of zero wasters are trying to actively cut out of their lives, which is what they're doing to be more sustainable. So for example, chip packets, face mask pouches, ramen packets, and anything that's that sort of foily material on the inside but is plastic on the outside, those have to be trashed. Soft plastics, if they're dirty, so for example, saran wrap can never be recycled. Uh, Plastic bags that have oil on them or have food in them that aren't clean, they can't be recycled. Aluminum trays, if they've had food in them and they still have food particles or they're oily or greasy. Styrofoam can't be recycled. Laminated paper, most coffee cups and lids. So most coffee cups actually are lined with plastic. And unless they specifically say that they are compostable, fully compostable, or if the lid has the number of plastics that your city or county takes curbside, usually they're trash. Ceramics are trash. Shampoo and soap pumps are trash. Spray bottle tops are trash. Foil that hasn't been cleaned, pots and pans, mirrors, and tissues with the plastic inserts. Oh, and straws. So that is to say that if something does explicitly state that it's compostable, then of course you can compost it. So there are compostable straws out there or single-use utensils, but for the most part, if they're plastic, they're trash.
And ultimately, it'd be great to send nothing to the landfill, which is the definition of zero waste. But I want to emphasize that zero waste is a goal, not an all or nothing for those who are just starting on their sustainability journey. So I know it can feel a bit overwhelming, but I think it's really worth it to invest in new habits when you know that you're not only helping yourself and your wallet, but also the environment. So I'd recommend choosing one habit or item to invest in today and then building off of that each month. And I know habits can be hard to form, so I forgive myself if, I forget my metal straw at home or I find myself throwing something away that should have been composted. For me, one thing that helps when I build new habits is I'm a very visual person. So I like to put a quick guide on our bins at work to remind people what can be composted, recycled, and trashed, and just basically make it as easy as possible for myself to do this every day. So find something that works for you and then let us know how we can help. So one of the examples we wanted to share was you can get a reusable water bottle or a coffee mug, and I know that there are some UVSA regions who are selling reusable straws as well. If you've already got your fabric shopping bag or a bamboo toothbrush, and that's great. We'd love to hear what you're doing and how you plan to continue working towards low impact living. In Boston in particular, I've recently found some restaurants in the area that give you discounts when you refill using your reusable cups or if you're buying items in bulk. So I get to stick to my budget through a sustainable, practical, and convenient lifestyle. And something I'm really excited about is that the library in my hometown in California recently became a library of things. So it not only lends books, but also household tools and instruments. So you'll see these popping up in more communities, but the focus of these libraries is really to enable people to spend less, waste less, and then connect more. So you can check out your local library for free resources on how you can move towards going zero waste.
And then also zero waste health and hygiene. You don't have to sacrifice the level of comfort that you have in terms of your hygienic practices or your health practices. So there are a lot of different replacements for the things that we're used to. So for example, instead of using a plastic toothbrush, which actually, according to Trashes for Tossers, every single toothbrush that you've ever used in your life still exists today and has not decomposted at all. So a bamboo toothbrush, in comparison, the handle is 100% compostable and the bristles can actually be recycled. There's also compostable floss that comes in a little glass container, and there's natural loofahs that you can use, bar soaps that don't come with packaging, but also a really big change for me is that I started using a menstrual cup on my periods because they actually last longer than normal pads and tampons, and they give me a lot more peace of mind than I ever had when I used to use single-use hygiene or feminine products. And so that's a really great option for women as well. And then there's zero waste household items. So for example, the first picture are dryer balls. So those are 100% wool balls that you can throw into your dryer and use instead of dryer sheets. And it actually helps your clothes dry a lot faster. It is free of dyes and perfumes. And also it is 100% compostable at the end of its life cycle. The second picture is beeswax wrap, which is reusable saran wrap. So you can actually take your hands, and through the warmth of your hands, you can mold these pieces of fabric to your bowls and containers to act as saran wrap. You can also use dish towels instead of using paper towels in your home or napkins in your home. Actually, and then there's also at the bottom these really handy meal prep containers that are glass and bamboo. They actually come from IKEA. They're super, super cheap. And so they're really, really handy for those who are looking to get rid of plastic containers in their home. And then this last picture, I don't know if he's on this call right now, but my roommate Danny uses this mason jar contraption that is metal and glass to create some really, really delicious cold brew. So he's actually able to grind up the beans, put them in there, let it soak in the water, and then compost the beans afterwards. So it's a really great zero waste alternative to traditional coffee.
So this was a lot of information, so we wanted to take a quick pause here and emphasize really that any step, no matter how small, is a step forward. I've personally gone through all my mail to learn how to opt out of paper bills. Most of the companies that do that give you a very small link in their paper mail, but it's worth it to kind of reduce the waste that's floating around. And oftentimes a lot of the magazines are wrapped in plastic. So if you can reduce that, that's helpful for the environment. I also try to bring in my own reusable bags or pack my lunch in glass containers like William mentioned. And I live in Boston, so it's a bit easier to take public transportation, but I also do my best to carpool when I'm back in California. So there's a lot of suggestions on this slide, but our challenge to you is to commit to one thing to do this week moving forward to go green. So in the side chat, Jenny actually posted that Amazon, there's a feature for Amazon users that lets you send all of your items in one box if you purchase multiple ones. And then you can choose a later shipping date and consolidate them while also getting $1 credit back in your purchases. So if you want someone accountable to help keep you accountable, Lily and myself are more than happy to connect. We really do appreciate everyone listening on this webinar. We'd be happy to connect online and form a support group as you all practice some everyday actions. So next, we want to focus on how you can make a difference on the community level.
So the biggest way that you can make a difference on the community level is, can you guess how? Educate. You want to educate everyone in your community. Educate your VSAs, educate the people that you work with, educate your schools, your classmates, your peers. Everything that you do and all the information that you are spreading ripples out even further than you can see. So for instance, when I actually go to the grocery store, I bring my own produce bags. And when I'm going through the checkout line, whether the cashier or the people standing behind me in line, they notice these things and they ask questions. They're like, oh, I didn't know that I could bring my own bags, or I didn't know that I could bring my own container to, purchase meat with and things like that. So I'm happy to teach them these things and just to educate more people just by being more conscious of the actions that I'm putting out into the universe every day. And every single one of you is already doing a big part just by being on this webinar and by learning, so that you're able to turn around and give that knowledge back to the people around you. Beyond that, the biggest thing that I did to become better in my zero waste and minimal waste journey was I joined groups. So there are tons of zero waste and plastic-free living groups on Facebook. There's actually a Sustainable Asian Traits page, which has been really, really helpful. So you join the page, and then if you have a question like, oh, how can I live more sustainably and still drink boba? Then a lot of people would go into the comments and give you a lot of suggestions for different containers that you can bring to boba shops, or ways that they've like hack the system to still enjoy the comforts of life, but then also be less wasteful. There's a lot of zero waste Instagrammers out there. And within these pages or on these Instagram pages, they will share a lot of tips and tricks and local places. So there's actually an Austin Zero Waste Living page where they talk about the farmers market, places that you can drop off common waste items. People will ask questions specific to the recycling and composting programs in Austin. So that's really helpful as well. And also encourage your VSAs to reduce the single-use material waste. So using paper plates instead of styrofoam or plastic plates, because you can compost those, having recycling bins at all your events, and explaining to your members how to use those bins and what goes in what bin is going to be really impactful for teaching your members, but then also making sure that they follow up on it. And then just, again, continuing to live zero waste in public, because people notice and they will ask questions.
I also want to say that you can make a difference in the community through your workplace. So here at Biogen, we have a sustainability working group, and we put in separate bins labeled for items that go in the trash, recycling, or compost bins, because I know it can be hard to remember what disposables go into each bin. We've also cut out personal trash bins to reduce the number of plastic bags lining them, and it helps us get in our steps to throw out our own trash throughout the day. So you can kind of think of it as a twofold thing where you're helping yourself be healthier and also helping the environment. One thing I personally ask my coworkers to do is to turn off their monitors when they're not in use to reduce energy waste, especially when you go home for the night. And we've also implemented a recycling K-Cup program for our Keurig machines. So all of our utensils in the kitchen area are now compostable, so like straws, knives, forks, things like that. And we even have mugs for visitors. So we've actually seen a 70% decrease in paper cup usage in one building alone after the first week it was implemented. And this is really thanks to individual coworkers that we can care deeply about going green at work. So don't hesitate to step up and really explore solutions that work for your workplace to go green.
And the final level of how you can make a difference that we're going to talk about is systemic. So while it's really, really important to still be doing the work at the individual level, at the community level, all of that isn't really going to matter unless we can make changes at the systemic level. So that means the overarching decision makers that are in the White House, or that are in Congress, or that are in our state legislatures, etc. So the number one way that you can make a change on a systemic level is to send comments to the EPA. So the EPA stands for the Environmental Protection Agency. They are an executive level branch, and they are solely tasked with creating policies and procedures that defend our environment from things that may harm it. So that can mean anything from regulating carbon pollution from companies to making rules about where or how structures can be built. And this means how construction and things like that impacts wildlife areas like wetlands or protected wetlands, things like that. So the way that you can pass comments on things on the EPA docket is that you can actually go to this website called www.regulations.gov, and you can comment on specific dockets that they have coming up. This first link, epa.gov/dockets, is where you can go check out things that are upcoming that they're going to decide upon or that they may enact as a policy. So you'll want to do a lot of research if this is kind of the route that you're wanting to take, and you'll likely want to partner up with large organizations or with other people in order to have a fully developed and well-researched comment that you're submitting to them. So this is actually a quote from their website. A comment that expresses support or disagreement for a particular action provides general feedback to the EPA. However, a comment that is constructive and provides information to support an argument is more likely to inform the EPA's decision-making process. And ultimately, another way that you can make systemic change is to show up to those local city council meetings, because it's a lot harder for them to ignore you when you are there in front of them and you have shown up in full force with your community, because it shows that the people of their constituents care enough about this that they showed up in person to stop something. So for instance, if your city is deciding upon, you know, a new recycling program that doesn't support all the things you used to be able to recycle, then show up to fight that. If they are trying to take away compost programs, or they aren't working actively to put compost programs out there for residents, show up to fight that. And just educating and mobilizing your community, because again, that knowledge and that power ripples out just from you. You're like the epicenter of the sustainability movement that happens all around you. So that all seems, I mean, those are all definitely a lot of examples of what you could be doing, but here are a couple examples of what our community is doing already. So the first example that we have are hair brooms. These hair brooms are actually made from clippings from salons that donate them to these different organizations that bind them together, and they are used as oil booms or they are used as booms to soak up oil during oil spills. They are natural, washable, reusable, and compostable. Instead of spraying chemical dispersants on the surface of the ocean to disperse all that oil, these are actually able to soak them up, to be washed, and to be reused over and over again.
And at this point, I'm sure you can tell by now how big I am on reducing and replacing plastic wrap. So I wanted to share how supermarkets in Vietnam have actually adopted initiatives from Thailand that uses banana leaves as packaging alternatives to plastic. And the banana leaves are naturally water resistant, are highly available throughout the community. So this is really important because we mentioned before how much marine plastic pollution occurs in Vietnam. Another trend that's growing momentum is using natural grass straws, and this grass grows quickly near the river and can be sustainably harvested. So this has been adopted in a lot of the major supermarkets, and it's really exciting to see how this is spreading to other countries as well.
In Dundee, Scotland, an engineer actually created wind turbines that harness the power of ongoing traffic and charges a battery underground.
And in other international news, people were really noticing how the London Marathon uses on average 920,000 plastic bottles. So they decided in 2019 to collaborate with the Skipping Rocks Lab and ditch plastic water bottles to give runners edible seaweed bubbles that can be consumed at any point in time. And these capsules are seaweed-based, which is highly available, and also biodegradable within 6 weeks. So there's no extra waste that's generated. So this reduced the usage of water bottles by over 200,000 in one marathon. So they're looking at continuing to expand this to other events as well.
And in the United States, 16-year-old Benjamin Stern actually created single-use water-soluble shampoos and conditioners. So these were a really great use case for industries that still needed those hygienic small bottles of hygiene products. So for example, hotels or shared dorm room spaces, or for travelers, they can actually just use this, and it uses the same technology as the edible water bottles, where they just dissolve underwater and you're able to use them in your hair or on your body.
And with so much to celebrate, it's easy to forget how little things like confetti can end up polluting the environment and aren't easily biodegradable. So recently, one museum in Iowa offered to Photoshop confetti into graduation photos, and a lot of people have been moving towards other alternatives like hole punching leaves or using dried flower petals instead of the confetti. So let's celebrate going green with biodegradable materials.
And finally, Philip Wang from the popular Wang Fu Productions, he opened a boba cafe in LA, and he specifically sourced sugarcane straws, recyclable cups, and with no styrofoam containers throughout the store, and only paper or biodegradable food containers.
Ultimately, we don't need a handful of people doing zero waste perfectly. As individuals, we can make a collective impact through our actions to go green.
And a lot of these programs or these initiatives that we just mentioned, you may not have heard about them because they don't have the support of the community. So these projects can and only will thrive with our support if we continue to influence market trends to show that there is a reason to invest in these kinds of products. So we as individuals can only do so much, but it is the actions of many that is going to produce real change. So we have some resources listed here. If you weren't aware, we actually have a UNAVSA civic engagement affinity group that you can actually join through Facebook. So if you look it up really quickly, I think it's called UNAVSA Civic Engagement. And that's also a great resource for environmentalism, where you can share articles or share any questions that you might have, and we'll be able to answer those. But here we have a couple specific targeted resources for people who are just starting to kind of learn about how to be more sustainable, or they want to live a greener lifestyle. So yeah, check those out. I recommend Sustainable Asian Traits on Facebook. And now I think we're going to move into the Q&A. I can't open the chat because I have the slides open, so April or
I can read them for you, don't worry. I'll go ahead and take the first two. So this one is asking, why are cooked food scraps not compostable? So I guess I want to clarify that technically they are biodegradable, but I wouldn't recommend composting them, because essentially as they decompose, they'll produce a lot of bad odors. They'll attract, animals who might scavenge on them, or flies and things like that. And part of composting is to build a sustainable system. So we don't generally recommend putting cooked food scraps or meats or milk products into the compost bin. And then from Philip, one of the questions was, what kind of strategies, pro tips, or tricks have y'all used to start and engage in conversations about the impact of climate change for our parents and grandparents' generations who may often not seem to care about the environment? That's a great question, and it's really hard. It's definitely a conversation that I have been having on an ongoing basis with my parents. Like, I don't know if your parents are like this, but mine hoard plastic bags, so they really hate the plastic bag ban. We have like a plastic bag of more plastic bags in our kitchen drawer, and it's hard for me sometimes to be like, hey, plastic bags are really bad. Like, I have these fabric bags for you that you can go shopping on if you want to use them. And so part of it is, it really does have to be a choice, but I try to make it as easy as possible for them. So I put the reusable bags in front of the plastic bag so they can reach for that first. Or a lot of the times for my parents, what I find really effective is kind of focusing on the monetary aspect. So saying like, this is how we save money if we buy things in bulk, or, it's less waste. You don't have to do all these things. They've also actually started reading a little bit more into it. So if you can find small examples that are personal to them, like I share with them any news about Vietnam that I hear when they're moving towards anything that reduces single-use plastic, they really like seeing that about their home country. So there's a lot of different ways, I guess, that you can approach that question. So Lillian, I don't know if you wanted to share any kind of strategies you use to engage older generations who might not be as environmentally conscious.
Yeah, well, my mom grew up in the countryside, and so a lot of these practices she kind of was already doing before it was cool or trendy. But on the flip side of that, the money approach, actually, I was kind of thinking about it. I mean, if you I don't know if this is like a good example or not, but I think that my parents to some level kind of equate the things that I have that are more sustainable, like this, they equate that with having nicer things, which makes you seem fancier or more expensive taste, if that makes sense. So I kind of, if you compare it to taking a plastic bag from a grocery store, like, no, I don't want your plastic bag because I have this fancy canvas tote that I'm going to use. And so it's kind of a clout thing, I have to admit. Oh gosh, this is recorded and that's going to be on the website forever. But yeah, I just kind of equate it with like, oh, this is kind of what the cool people are doing these days. Make it, yeah.
Yeah, and then Jenny also added some extra information about the question in terms of composting food scraps. So she also pointed out that if you compost in your backyard, it won't get hot enough, but you can also compost them if you do have a high temperature composting facility. So thanks for that clarification. Another question is from Charisma. So how would you respond to someone who says they can't afford to be environmentally conscious? I guess for me, I would say do what you can where you can. If you can't or don't want to or won't invest in something new at this time, then that's fine. Part of being environmentally conscious is also using your current products. So we're not suggesting you throw away everything in your bathroom and then buy all these things that we put on the slide, because that would also defeat the purpose. But even if you just kind of make one small change each day, or think about different ways where maybe you are wasting a little bit more, so you just turn off all the lights before you leave your apartment, or you can shop at the local farmers market. Or there's some companies, if you are paying your own utilities, there's certain companies, I think SMUD, who will track your energy usage, and sometimes they offer different programs, like if you turn off your electricity or things like that for 1 hour during a high energy usage time, then they'll give you a refund on part of your utility bill. So part of it does tie in with the cost. And then Lillian, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to that question.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the examples that we did give were pretty minimal investment, if zero investment. So one example that I can think of is clothing. I know a lot of us spend a lot of money on clothing, and a really big way that you can cut down on how much you're spending overall, like as a person, but then also utilizing what your friends have, is doing clothing swaps. So you kind of just organize a time where all of you come together and you bring the things that you no longer want in your closet, and then you're able to trade clothes with other people. And then at the end of it, everything that doesn't get taken gets donated to Goodwill or things like that, but also shopping at thrift stores and things like that. Those are examples of ways to use what's already out there in the like in the market or in people's closets, without spending a lot of money or without contributing to fast fashion. In terms of investing in items to be zero waste, I mean, that is really kind of a portion of what people could be doing in order to live more sustainably. So it's like April said, being conscientious of how, like, your lights, how much energy you're using, or for example, crafting a lot more things for your lifestyle. It's just about being creative with what you have versus looking at the things that you need in order to be more sustainable.
Yeah, and I think also in terms of time, and I guess the willpower to change your habits is also a lot too. I think making it as easy for yourself as possible. So form a group with someone, find a buddy who will help keep you accountable. There's things like minimalism challenges where you each day you try out a different challenge that will help the environment go green. So there's a lot of resources out there that we're happy to share if you have further questions. I'm going to read Luke's question. So Lillian, this is for you. What are your favorite companies in terms of their sustainability and ethical practices?
Gosh, I'm trying to think. Okay, so I have a couple, and for varying reasons. So my very favorite zero waste shop is the Package Free Store. It's run by a woman named Lauren Singer, and she has a blog called Trash is for Tossers. That is actually what got me invested in being zero waste in the first place. Is I was listening to her, and I was completely kind of like falling in love with the mission that she had for her company. So I really support going to that store first if you are looking for items to replace everyday plastic or single-use items in your life. She does a lot for the community in New York. She hosts a lot of sustainability panels in her store in Brooklyn. She has TerraCycle boxes that people are able to use. She has like refill stations for handmade deodorant, conditioner, laundry detergent, all these things that she just created this company from the ground up. So I definitely admire her. And I would say that there are a lot of large companies out there that do have skeletons in their closet, but are making strides towards being more sustainable. So some large companies I'd like to shout out is Adidas is actually has committed to using recycled materials for their sneakers. I don't know the specifics, I'd have to look it up, but I think what they're doing is really great. And also, even though IKEA is actually one of the world's largest users of timber, they have made leaps and bounds strides trying to cut down on the amount of strain that they're putting on the environment. So I think it's really great that they're owning up to that, and they're not just plowing ahead with no concern for the rest of the earth. So I think those two companies are really great. And I would just say local companies, like I live in Austin, and there are a lot of places that I could shout out. but hearing about all the amazing things that small business owners in Austin, Texas are doing in order to help the city meet its zero waste goal is really admirable. So I'll have to send you a list later.
Yeah, and then one other company I'd like to highlight, I think that's very recognizable to a lot of people on the call is going to be Patagonia. So they do reject fast fashion, which Lillian talked about, and they essentially create high quality, longer lasting products, but they also offer a repair and reuse program, which is really great. And there's something new that they offer called Worn Wear. And that's basically extending the life of gear to repair, share, or recycle your gear. And they kind of highlight how if you keep your clothing in use for just 9 extra months, you can reduce your carbon dioxide, water, and your waste footprint by about 20 to 30%. And actually, Lillian, that's coming to Austin, Texas. So that'll be something to look forward to as well. And I think this is the last question I've seen so far posted. This is from Isabella. What should you do if your locale doesn't collect recyclables separately, i.e. they don't provide bins or collect recyclables? And I know, Lillian, you had mentioned a little bit about showing up in person to advocate for programs like this. Do you have any other suggestions?
Yeah, so on top of advocating from the city that they need to provide these resources for their residents, I think it is a really big fallacy of like our economy that the onus is on the consumer to get rid of the materials that companies are putting out there. It is a really big thing that a lot of environmentalists feel that companies need to take more responsibility for the items that they're putting out there, especially the ones that are creating not things that are not recyclable. So for instance, Nestle has been under fire recently for putting a lot of plastic waste out in the world. Beverage companies have been targeted, or I mean, have been called out as well. So if you are in a city where you don't have the means to recycle curbside, then that's where you'd need to lean more heavily on the communities that are the community pages for zero waste and for plastic free living that are specific to your area. So for example, like I said, Austin has a specific sustainability page that I'm a part of, where people are able to fire off questions like, hey, I have an old TV, where should I take it, right? They'll be like, oh, take it to the Austin Restore Place. This is the address, blah, blah, blah. Or this thrift store is having a clothing swap or whatever. So you just bring your clothes and you don't have to pay to get through the door, things like that. So you would need to go to that page and ask, hey, like, where can I take these items? And if you can't recycle them, maybe you should consider, instead of bringing those items into your home, replacing them with ways in which you can consume those items without creating waste. So for example, like if you are someone who likes boba, right, you can bring your own container to the boba shop. They'll actually usually, depending on how cooperative they're feeling that day, fill it up with the boba for you, right? And then you can take it home. You do not use a plastic cup, or you do not use a plastic straw because you used your own. So those are all things that you probably would need to take into consideration for your situation.
I didn't see any other questions that were typed out in the chat, but before we move on to our last activity, which is a Kahoot quiz, we wanted to let people ask a live question if they're unable to type. I know a couple people on this call are driving, so can you give people unmuting privileges, and we'll just give a quick pause in case there's any questions. And then while he's doing that, Lillian, do you want to pull up the Kahoot activity?
Cool. Go ahead and unmute yourself if you have any questions. FOP is giving access right now to people.
Hi, Tim.
Everyone should be cleared.
Cool. If people have follow-up questions, again, please feel free to reach out to Lillian or April or the Civic Engagement Committee of UNAVSA. But otherwise, let's go ahead and move on to our last thing, Lillian.
All right, so we've actually created a little trivia game here to test y'all's knowledge. So let's see. Start. So if y'all want to join the game, you can actually join going to www.kahoot.it or going to the Kahoot app and entering the number 783-8308. 783-8308.
And I just pasted the website and the code into the chat if you need it. Again, that's www.kahoot.it. The code is 783-8308.
Alrighty.
Once again, that's 783-8308.
So we started at 10 or
Let's see, we have about 16 attendees, so maybe we can do, but not everyone might have access to their phones right now. Yeah, give it maybe like 30 more seconds in case somebody has slow Wi-Fi.
I was gonna say the questions are tricky, y'all. Some of them are trick questions, so make sure to read them carefully.
And for those who have never played or used Kahoot before, basically there's a short question and it's a multiple choice. So usually there's 4 options, and then you'll need to look at your laptop screen or your phone screen, the webinar screen, to look at the question, and then switch over to your Kahoot and click the corresponding color or right answer. And you get points for getting it right, and you get points for how quickly you answer it. So there's kind of like 2 ways, two factors into how many points you get. But yeah, if you're on your phone, you might need to switch back and forth between like the Zoom and the Kahoot app. Anyways, I think we're ready to get started, Lillian.
All right, let's get started. So there's 19 questions, but half of them are short, I promise. On average, how many pounds of solid waste is produced per person per day in the US? On average, how many pounds of solid waste is produced per person per day in the US? All right, and the answer is 4.4 pounds, so that is correct. According to the presentation, in 2017, 4.4 pounds of solid waste was produced per person per day. So let's see. Go Green is in first place. I think that might be April. I don't know who that is, but I think it might be April. What kind of gas is emitted by landfills? What kind of gas is emitted by landfills? All right, and the correct answer is methane. Methane gas is the gas produced by organic material rotting in landfills in anaerobic environments, and that means deprived of oxygen. And they're 21 times more potent at trapping heat than carbon dioxide. So charisma has risen above. I didn't mean to call you out if that was you, April. I'm sorry. Charisma has risen into first place. What is the greenhouse gas effect? What is the greenhouse gas effect? All right, and that is correct. It is when greenhouse gases trap heat in the atmosphere. Good job, everyone. All right, so next question. What can't be recycled single stream or curbside? And this is a select any that apply. Select any that apply. What can't be recycled single stream or curbside? That is correct. So electronics and plastic bags typically cannot be recycled in the curbs or in the containers curbside. There are certain places that do accept plastic bags. So Bloomington, Indiana, like I said, accepts plastic bags. But I am not aware of any municipality that accepts electronics curbside. Next. Ooh, Charisma's on fire. What can't be composted? What cannot be composted? All right, and the correct answer is things labeled biodegradable. So there actually is no regulation on what is considered biodegradable, but if something is compostable, it'll straight up just say, I'm compostable. It will not say biodegradable. That is an example of green marketing, where they kind of say something that is like flashy and cool to make you think that the product that you're buying is better than it is. But in actuality, biodegradable things can't even be composted. So they're not worth purchasing. Don't be fooled. It is not correct. Ooh, we have someone rising through the ranks. What do you always have to do to recycling? What do you always have to do to recycling? Now I kind of wish I had the background music playing, Kevin, but I know there's no way for me to turn it down. It was so obnoxious.
Yeah, that music is.
All right, and that's correct. You have to rinse it out, and you have to rinse and clean it out before you recycle it. Otherwise, they will send it to landfill. Which is better between recycling and composting? Which is better between recycling and composting? There's 11 answers. Why isn't that? Oh, okay. Um, composting, that is correct. So just to explain a little bit, when you recycle something, that is a very mechanical process. So it goes through a plant, you know, it gets melted down into new materials, things like that. And that actually creates greenhouse gases. That creates more carbon dioxide just from manufacturing and breaking down the recycled materials. So composting, in comparison, does none of that. It's better for the environment. You're creating nutrients that you're putting back into the soil. So you always want to compost before recycling. Recycling really should be like the last um, ditch effort to get rid of something. So how can I voice my concerns to the EPA? How can I voice my concerns to the EPA? Submit a comment on their website. That is correct. So you'd want to submit a comment on that regulations.gov page to directly voice your concerns to the EPA. Go Green has surpassed Charisma and taken first place. Let's see if that will stand. What is one action you will take to live more sustainably? Select any that apply. What is one action you will take to live more sustainably? Select any that apply.
Yeah, I thought that said shoplift stores at first.
They're all correct. These are all ways that you, one action that you can take moving forward to live more sustainably. You can try and do all four. That would be awesome. But again, we acknowledge that this is a journey and that every step that you take is better than doing nothing. So even just doing like one thing, one different thing a week, one different thing a day, one different thing a month means a lot in terms of changing how you think about your daily comforts. It changes your habits and it changes you to be more comfortable with living more sustainably. So good job, everyone.
And if you want a buddy to help you do one of these items together, I volunteer myself a million.
Yes, I agree. Okay, so now we're going to go into a section called Where Does This Item Belong? Greasy napkin. So where does it belong? Trash, compost, recycling, or it's complicated? Where does this item belong? Greasy napkin. Compost, that's correct. So greasy paper items, greasy cardboard, unless it's glossy or has that like glossy finish on it, it actually can be composted. And when you're composting, by the way, when you're backyard composting, you need to have an equal amount of dry material, which means leaves, lawn clipping, paper, things like that. You need to have equal parts dry materials with wet materials, which is fruit peels, um, vegetable trimmings. I actually can't think of anything else. Like any of the food essentially that you're throwing in there, you also need to balance it with dry materials in order to make the compost work. Isabella's moving out, and so is Sam. All right, where does this item belong? Glass. Where does this item belong? Glass. Trash, compost, recycling, or it's complicated. Recycling, that's correct. So glass, usually, depending on where you live, can be recycled curbside, and it can actually be recycled over and over again. It doesn't degrade. It doesn't degrade the more that you recycle it. And Charisma is back in first place. Isabella is in a close second. All right, where does this item belong? Metal. Where does this item belong? Metal. Uh, yeah, so there's actually two correct answers here, which in hindsight I should have done for class as well. But it is recyclable and it is complicated because what kind of metal is it? Does your local municipality accept that kind of metal? Do they recycle, period? Do they recycle metal at all? It can be really complicated, but for the most part, it is recyclable. And Luke coming up into fifth place, making it onto the leaderboard. All right, ramen packet. Where does this item belong? Ramen packet. Trash, compost, recycling, or it's complicated. All right. And the correct answer is that it is in fact trash. So mixed materials are almost never recyclable and they almost always go in the trash. TMN has risen into third place. All right. Where does this item belong? Plastic bags. Where does this item belong? Plastic bags. Is it trash? Oh, okay. It's complicated. Yeah, so plastic bags, again, it really depends on where you live, but you usually have to take plastic bags to the grocery store in order to recycle them, which means that they're not easily curbside recyclable, which is why I didn't count it as recyclable. Some grocery stores, we actually don't really know what they're doing with the bags. So it can be really hard to figure out if your plastic bags are going to a good home, I guess, are actually being reused, or is it just a ploy by the grocery store to make themselves seem more green? So there's a lot of, speculation about what happens to them. And then after a certain point, they can't be recycled anymore. So that's why in general, we try to avoid using plastic bags. And it looks like the leaderboard has stayed exactly the same. So used aluminum foil. Where does this item belong? Used aluminum foil. Used aluminum foil. The trash, and it's complicated. So if you want to take it a step further, you can actually wash the aluminum foil, make sure that it's totally clean, there's no grease on it, it's completely 100% fine, and then you can actually just wad it up in a ball and recycle it. So that's what I do sometimes if I've ordered Ethiopian food, because y'all know I love Ethiopian food. You can just wash off the aluminum foil in the sink. Just make sure it's like 100% clean. I actually use my hands to make sure I'm getting all the grease off. I let it dry, and then the next day I'll ball it up and throw it in the recycling. So it's complicated, but it's also trash. You can't recycle it as is. Alrighty, next question. Where does this item belong? Styrofoam. Where does this item belong? Styrofoam. Trash, that is correct. So for the most part, there are not many widespread programs that recycle styrofoam. It's actually a big misconception that people just throw styrofoam in the recycling and assume that it's recyclable, but it's not. It is straight up trash. Alrighty. Where does this item belong? Paper. Where does this item belong? Paper. Where does the item belong? Paper. Trash, compost, recycling, or it's complicated? So the answer is compost and recycling. So you can absolutely recycle paper, but actually I would encourage you to compost it instead. Like I said, you need to have a balance of dry ingredients and wet ingredients to make compost activate. And paper is a really great source of dry ingredients and materials for that. Where does this item belong? Cotton fabric. Where does this item belong? Cotton fabric. And the answer is compost or recycling. So you can actually compost cotton fabrics. You can compost anything that is cotton as long as it's not, for example, cotton makeup wipes or things like that, because they do have other chemicals in them. So basically, yes, you can compost it, but then also you can textile recycle things if you find a program that accepts textile recycling. A very, very common program that I think anyone has accessibility to is the H&M textile recycling program. I'm kind of on the fence about whether or not I do support that program, because they are encouraging you to purchase more fast fashion items with the program. And also, there's no guarantee that 100% of the textiles that are diverted to them are reused into new pieces or are being disposed of sustainably. So those are kind of some give and takes with that program. Next question, where does this item belong? Synthetic fabrics. Where does this item belong? Synthetic fabrics. Where does this item belong? Synthetic fabrics. Trash, compost, recycling, or it's complicated. And I put recycling and it's complicated for the same reason. Actually, there are a lot of textile recycling programs. There's actually a program out of Houston, Texas that will set up free pods in apartment complexes near the trash bins. I actually have one here at my apartment complex. You can take it to H&M. You can donate them to Goodwill. You can upcycle them into new things. There are so many different things you can do with fabric, which is why it's also kind of complicated, right? Because it's not easily accessible. It's not easily accessible for people to donate those items or to recycle their textiles. Alrighty. And in third place, we have TMN. In second place, we have Isabella. Hello. And in first place, we have Charisma. Congratulations, y'all. Glad to see that y'all were paying attention. Runner-ups were Go Green and Luke. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight on this webinar. We had a lot of fun running it, and we hope to see you back again in the future for our next Empower Up webinar. Any final words, April?
None for me. Just really want to thank everyone for being on this call. I think you all are already taking steps towards being stewards of the environment. So we're really excited to see the change that can come out of this. So feel free to have conversations with us, with your friends, with your family about going green. I know this year there's a lot of issues to focus on, and I really do think environmentalism and sustainability is one of them. So thanks all for staying on.
Thanks everyone, and hope you can go ahead and stop recording the webinar.